And I'm told that we've got Professor James A. Russell, who's the Associate Professor at the Department of National Security Affairs at NPS, where he teaches courses on U.S. foreign policy, military innovation and national security strategy. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Professor Russell, we were speaking a little while back where it was still in the realm of speculation, but now the American president has confirmed that airstrikes have been carried out on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. He says that an entire payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. We need to wait for the assessment by the IAEA about the level of damage the Fordow nuclear facility may have sustained. In your assessment, where do we go from here? Is this yet another military misadventure? All right, we seem to have a bit of a audio issue with the guest there. We'll try reconnect with him. Professor Russell, if you can hear me, you know, the American president has just confirmed that the United States of America has carried out what he describes as a successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran. That is Fordow, Natanz and Esfahan. Where do we go from here, Professor?
The war has started. Escalation will continue. The United States is now at war with the Republic of Iran, and we are in uncharted territory, not just for the United States and Iran, but throughout the region, where there are many U.S. military installations and thousands of American troops. So the United States has taken the decision that essentially take it down the road that is very similar to the one it chose in 2003 in Iraq, in the invasion of Iraq, which again involved invading a regional state based on spurious and false intelligence. And we are doing the same thing here today. Here we sit 23, 24 odd years later, and the United States has apparently learned nothing from that experience.
You know, now that this war has now officially begun, in your assessment, what do you think would be the Iranian response?
I think the Iranians are going to do what they can to defend themselves, which is just what you would expect they would do. I think a question will be is what sorts of escalations the Iranians choose to want to try to implement. They could attack U.S. military bases in the Gulf region. They could elect to try to close the Strait of Hormuz. They could start targeting American naval vessels, which are clustered around the Strait of Hormuz. I think there are any number of unpalatable kinds of steps that they could take in response to this unprecedented American attack. And I fear for the future. There's no other way to describe it.
Right, and also looking at you know, how things will play out in the region at large, because this is a war that will have regional and also global ramifications, considering as to what the Iranian response is now likely to be. But there's something interesting that Donald Trump has put out in his social media post. I want you to weigh in on this. You know, besides saying that it's been a successful attack, besides saying that this is an attack that no other military in the world could have carried out, Trump still writes something interesting. He says, now is the time for peace. He writes this in all caps. What message do you think Donald Trump is trying to send out after having staged this attack by saying that now is the time for peace?
I can't imagine any world leader coming up with such a nonsensical formulation in which, on the one hand, we are going to bomb you, and on the next sentence he says he wants peace. I don't know on what basis either Iran or any country could trust a word that comes out of his mouth. It's obvious that he is very capricious in his decision making. It's almost as if it's a reality TV show based approach to going to war, as he's been publicly musing about this for the last couple of weeks when he's been cornered by reporters. He has publicly said, "Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. It could be yes, it could be no." It's just a repeat of the reality TV show approach. But this is going to war. This is the United States. Iran is a country of 90 million people. a country, by the way, that has signaled its interest in restarting diplomacy once the shooting stopped. And I think it's clear that Trump had no inclination to take on the Israelis to get them to stop. He had no inclination to take on the lobby at home, the Israeli lobby at home, and he's caved to that pressure. And here we sit with an American president who has been duped by the Israeli prime minister into going to war in the Middle East against Iran. And I can think of no worse sort of outcome than the one we are witnessing here today, with a president, an inexperienced president, a president that lacks the staff around him to position in forums nuanced and sensible choices. And instead, as I said, it's just this capricious, maybe yes, maybe no, and
Right.
I don't understand how any sitting president can make decisions in such a way, affecting so many millions of people. This, as you correctly say, this is not just the United States, Iran, and the region. This is an attack of global significance.
Right. Now, at this moment, there are reports which are being cited from U.S. officials who say that B-2 bombers were involved in this attack that the Americans have carried out on the 3 nuclear facilities in Iran.
Yeah.
But we don't know whether those B-2 bombers that had been flown from the Missouri Air Base all the way to Guam were the ones that were used, because these could be other B-2 bombers that may have been stationed on the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean region. Because any time there are these highly publicized movement of military activity, it tends to be a decoy. We need to wait and watch as to what the American military, of course, has to give in terms of its explanation. But in your assessment, the fact that the Americans are now officially involved in this war, the Iranians have exercised a lot of restraint over the course of the last several months. They speak of a policy of, strategic restraint, because the last thing Tehran wants is to get involved in a military contest which involves the United States of America. They could inflict a lot of damage to the American military bases in the region. They've also said that anyone who targets our nuclear bases will become a legitimate target. But in the contest that they have got going with the Israelis, the Iranians have effected an enormous amount of damage to the Israeli cities and also to Israeli prestige and this aura of invincibility. Do you think the Iranians would try as much as possible to ensure that America does not get into this war in a very big way, or that the Iranians have no choice? This is a war that is imposed on them.
I think it's a great question, which gets to the heart of this matter, which speaks to what are the Iranian calculations with the American entry into the war at Israel's behest, and what kind of escalation choices do they face? And I think this is a difficult. I can't speak to the mindset in Tehran right now, except that I think, like any leader in any state, right, any government in any state will seek to defend itself with whatever means it has at its disposal, and recognize that in a situation like this. So again, the wish of the Trump administration, I presume, like the Israelis, is going to crow about how great our military personnel are and how accurate our weapons are. But what's going to happen in 3 weeks or a month?
Right.
As the exchange of fire continues in a wide variety of different ways, in which the initial sort of optimism and the headlines go away and the realities of a war set in which the United States will again be faced with this problem of, well, what do you do? I mean, we saw the recent history here of the Trump administration coming into office and the president making, for example, grandiose statements about bombing the Houthis. We all remember this. And he said, we are going to bomb the Houthis back into the Stone Age, effectively, or words to that effect. And what happened? 6 months later, he just stopped because it wasn't having any effect. The Houthis weren't going to surrender. This is going to be a rerun of that. The Iranians are not going to surrender. The Iranians are going to push back in ways that we don't anticipate. And we are going to discover, I think, that they're maybe better at this stuff than we give them credit for. It's a historic sort of a reality of political leaders who typically underestimate the capabilities of their enemies. And I fear that we are blundering, that the United States is again blundering its way into a war with an enemy that it does not understand.
Professor Russell, I just want to stop you there because I want you to weigh in on something very important here. Now, Donald Trump says that he's bombed Natanz. He's also bombed Fordow and one more facility that actually has been bombed. But the fact is, there is another very crucial facility at Bushehr, where, according to reports, about 150 Russian nuclear technicians and engineers work. The IAEA yesterday, in its assessment, said that bombing the Bushehr nuclear facility would mean that there would be a radioactive leak which would result in some kind of a Chernobyl-like disaster, which would engulf every nation in the region, because the radioactivity leak would spread for several hundred kilometers. So even though the American president claims that this is a victory, the fact is the Iranian nuclear program still continues, and the Bushehr nuclear facility has not been touched at all.
Of course. I mean, all that you say is absolutely true, of course, about the Bushehr facility. There would be a catastrophic consequence to the region of a huge radioactive cloud. But this does get to this sort of broader question, which I think you quite correctly raised, which is that this is a nuclear program which is spread out all over the country. Iran is a big country. It's a country of 90 million people. It has plenty of trained people that can involve themselves in restarting any sort of program that has been damaged by the United States and the Israelis. All this talk of ending. Well,
all right, we seem to have lost the line there with Professor Peters. We'll try reconnect with Professor Russell Peters in just a bit. This is the key facility, the Fordow nuclear facility that is buried underneath a mountain, several meters underneath the mountain. We need to wait and watch as to what the IAEA's assessment is. Remember, the Israelis on their own had tried to target the Fordow nuclear facility, but the IAEA later came out and said that despite the very best efforts that the Israelis had put in, the nuclear facility per se had not been affected. So what has happened this time around? We need to wait and watch. But remember, the American president is about to address the nation. He will be talking to the American nation. He's expected to address the nation at 10 p.m. local time. That'll be 3 a.m. GST, after the United States of America has conducted aerial attacks on 3 of Iran's nuclear sites. This is what he claims, that this is a historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the world. Iran must now agree to end the war. This is what the American president has put out on his Truth social media post. But remember, there are other nuclear sites of Iran that still remain untouched. For instance, the Bushehr nuclear facility, which the IAEA has warned, if it were to be bombed, would set off a Chernobyl-like radiation leak, which would affect the water supplies for countries across the region. It would result in radioactive leaks that will affect countries several hundred kilometers, even outside the borders of Iran. So this radioactive leak, if it happens, will not be limited to Iran at all. And the Iranians have made it also abundantly clear that they will respond. And we need to wait and watch as to how the Iranians, of course, choose to respond from here. But something was expected would happen from the end of the Americans, because remember, Donald Trump returned to Washington, and this was something of an indicator that something was indeed likely to happen, because Donald Trump likes to spend his weekends in Florida or New Jersey. regardless of what's happened in the news. But he's in Washington, D.C. tonight, and we'll hear from the American president in some time from now. And Professor Russell is with us from the United States of America. Professor, we were talking about, the many possibilities as to how this conflict could unfold from here, because it's difficult to predict. We stand on the edge of a razor, and it's difficult to foresee as to how things could, of course, progress from here. Because taking out 3 nuclear sites still does not mean ending Iran's nuclear program.
Yes, this has been the fundamental calculation since Israel launched its attack. I don't want to sound like a broken record on for your viewers here, but the same calculus held true when Israel launched the war. The same calculus holds true now for the United States, which is that the Iran nuclear program cannot be bombed out of existence. I don't care how big the bombs are. I don't care how accurate the weapons are. The program cannot be bombed out of existence, period.
Right.
There's no theory, there's no military theory of victory here for the United States or for Israel, assuming, of course, that their objective is simply limited to the nuclear program. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, has said, his real objective now is regime change, and President Trump has demanded the unconditional surrender, whatever that even means, of the Iranian state. So I think these questions are going to unfold in front of us.
Absolutely.
And the only thing I can again, and your viewers might think me a cynical person, but I lived through the 2003 Iraq invasion, which started out on one sort of assumption, and then evolved its way. I think there were 8 different rationales for why the United States decided to invade Iraq, which evolved over the course of the Iraq War until we finally decided that we were there to institute democracy.
Right.
Which is another way of simply saying that we did not have a clear handle on what the political objectives were that we were seeking to achieve through the application of force.
I think these are some of the issues that we will get to know in the days to come. Professor Russell, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington, D.C. We're completely out of time, but this is our rolling coverage, because this is a big, big moment for what has happened in our world at this moment, where the entire region of West Asia at this moment stands on a razor's edge. We'll slip into a short break. More updates will continue on the other side. Stay tuned to WION.